don't forget that AI comes from people. The algorithms are coming from people. The computing capacity is coming from people. And for me, the data are all about people. We are underlying these systems. And I think we need to remember that. Don't stand there in awe of the magic of the AI. It's not magic. It's not magic.
I'm Misha Da Vinci. This is the Griff Podcast, conversations to get you ready for the future. Did you know that everywhere you go, everything you do, all of your daily habits, your most private and personal moments, bodily functions, breathing patterns, heart rate, even the thoughts you think and emotions you feel are being observed, tracked and fed into a multi-billion-dollar data industry that powers the digital world? In this industry, you and I are nothing more than sources of data points to be harvested by any means necessary. There's something very wrong with this. My guest this week is going to help us understand how this invasive but invisible data industry is impacting our lives and what we can do about it. Wendy H. Wong is Professor of Political Science and Principals Research Chair at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, where she studies global governance and the governance of emerging technologies. She's particularly attentive to how non-state actors, like non-governmental organizations, civil society actors, social movements, and corporations, govern at the global and domestic levels. Her areas of interest are AI, big data, human rights, and humanitarian assistance. She's written 2 award-winning books, dozens of peer-reviewed articles, and has contributed to outlets like the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and The Conversation. Wendy's latest book is We the Data, Human Rights in the Digital Age. She got her PhD from UC San Diego and did her undergrad at UC Berkeley. This is an eye-opening conversation that you cannot afford to miss. Let's dive in and get ready for the future. Wendy, so awesome to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Misha. It's great to be here.
Your latest book is called We the Data, Human Rights in the Digital Age. This is a massively important topic that people don't know enough about. I can't wait to dive into that. But before we get there, you're a political scientist focused on global governance and the governance of emerging technologies. So tell us what this job is, and then I want to know more about you and how you even got to this point in your life.
Okay, wow. Big question. 2 big questions. So political science in general is about power. So like who has it, who does it, who doesn't, how it's distributed in society. How do we think about different forms of power? So that's sort of generally, if you talk to a political scientist, that's what they're going to tell you. I'm an international relations scholar, which means that I'm interested in things at the global level. So a lot of international relations is about interstate conflict and cooperation. But I'm also interested, I think in particular, my niche in the field is thinking about non-state governance. So what are NGOs doing, which is what I did a lot of research on for my past 2 books. But then also what are companies doing? What are corporations doing at the global level? I think that's really relevant now when we think about AI. And also in my book, they play a big role because corporations have been quite pronounced, let's say, in AI and also in the collection and analysis of data about people. So that's my general background. I'm really interested in human rights. I've been studying human rights and teaching about human rights now for, I hate to say it, but almost 2 decades. So I think a lot about what humanity has in common and what values have emerged globally, especially in the 20th century after World War II. That's really where we get international human rights really taking hold through the United Nations system. And so that's probably substantively what has really motivated a lot of my research over the years. And so what led me to this book, sort of 2 things. I mean, one, I had 2 kids and a lot of thinking about kids these days as a new parent, especially when I was having the kids, was posting about your children. Like, what is the responsibility of parents in terms of thinking about the content that they're posting when it comes to their kids or even other people, but especially children, because I think it's important. We make so many decisions as parents on behalf of our children,
Yeah.
that I just felt like that was a big thing. I had so many friends and acquaintances constantly posting about their kids, even from the earliest days of their lives. And I just thought, I don't know how I feel about that. So that was something probably brewing in the back of my mind when I was thinking about the implications of having so much data about minors, right, floating around that they will have to live with when they get older.
You're this political scientist focused on global governance, governing emerging technologies. You've been writing these books. You've written this really, really cool book about human rights and the datafication of the world, which is what I want to go into in a minute. But tell us about Wendy Wong. How did you get to this point in your life? And you live in British Columbia.
I do. Yes, now I do.
Right. So tell us your story a little bit so listeners know you as a human being.
Well, I didn't know I wanted to be a professor, I think, for a long time. I think nowadays I'm more settled into this idea that, I have a lot of interests. So one of the things that was a problem I guess, when I was finishing university was that I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but I had a lot of people telling me, well, you've been really great at thinking about things from a research perspective, and you should just check it out. So, I ended up doing this career and I really enjoy it. I like it. But I find myself really drawn to other disciplines. So this book, actually, We the Data, was based not in political science. It's actually a lot of the work comes from other fields. So law, I even draw on some humanities. I draw on all sorts of social sciences. I looked at how people working in technical fields like data science and computer science think about, AI and think about datafication.
Yeah.
And I thought that, so one of the reasons I really liked writing this book was because I found it very edifying. I was able to go outside of my own specific niche in academia. But, how I came to this is I think it was something that allowed me to be creative. I think this career in academia is often thought of as very stodgy and very narrow, but I actually also think that we can do fun things, right? We write a lot. Part of our job, most people think of us as teachers, and I think that's a huge part of my life. But we are also creative writers, and I think that's something that's not highlighted as much. We sit around, we read other people's ideas, but we think of our own ideas as well. I really enjoy that part of my life. As a kid, I was really into sports, and now I have kids they're both into different kinds of sports. That's really fun. We have a dog. I've always loved dogs, so I'm really into that as well.
How old are your children now?
They're 5 and 7.
Oh.
Yeah, they take up a lot of time. So I do spend a lot of time being their mom as well. So part of also what I've come to realize is the difficulty of balancing all of these different things that I'm interested in. I love my kids, I love my family, but I also am really, I try to be a very serious researcher as well. And I'm very invested in my work. I find it very consuming when I'm in the middle of a project. So yeah, I think that's really, that's where I am in my life right now.
So you have your young children who are going to come of age in late 2030s, right? We're talking
something like that. Yeah.
Right. And this is such a pivotal point in human history where we're at this juncture, I think, where massive change is upon us and humanity at large is not aware at all. I mean, that's the reason I'm doing this podcast. I'm like, people wake up. Yeah. Things are happening. Massive things are happening that absolutely they're so different to anything we've conceived of in the past. So as a parent of young children, I like to ask my guests these questions, and I'm going to frame it in this way for you. What scares you about this point? Because you're in your work and in your research, and clearly from your book, you're seeing a lot of things that most people are not seeing. So what scares or concerns you? And then what maybe excites you about this point? What is this moment in your perspective?
I think this moment is one that's very fraught, as you point out. I think looking at how Gen Z, for example, has responded to these changes, and my kids are younger than that. They're in Gen Alpha, right? That's been the tagline for them, the label. Okay, so it's going to sound weird, but what scares me most is climate change. Maybe that's why I didn't write a book about climate change, but also, because of this book, I've thought through a lot of the implications of data. And what I really feel like is yes, many of our behaviors, our thoughts, our values are being datafied. That's this idea, or becoming digital data. That's this idea of datafication. But what gives me hope in this period about data and about AI is that we have lots of choices to make. We have agency, we have choice about how AI and how datafication continues. And I think that's really why, I think so younger generations really need to be forefronted at some of these talks. Because a lot of times I do feel like older generations are talking on behalf of millennials and Gen Z and saying, these people know what they're doing. There's this idea of, quote, the digital native, and I actually don't think that that's true. No one is a digital native in the sense that human beings, are physical beings as well. So I think we need to rethink as a society, or as many societies, how are we going to deal with datafication? It's not fair to say, well, the younger people know what they're doing. I don't necessarily think that they, quote, know what they're doing when it comes to the future implications of data. They've always been born in a situation where data have been taken.
Precisely. It's interesting. When the whole concept of digital natives came up, and then everybody was like, oh, there are these millennials who understand what it's like to be online. And I'm just like, as a Gen X person, I'm like, no, they don't have a clue. And then we go into the younger generation, Gen Z, I'm like, even worse. They've never lived in a world that didn't have the internet and didn't have smartphones. And they are actually completely lacking an understanding of what it means to live. And they have no concept, because the entire world, our institutions, have been structured for an analog world. And now this digital layer becomes superimposed. Everything's being translated. Why would they know? They don't know the older world. They don't know the analog world. They don't know what should be translated into the digital world. And I think that's where people like you have this massive, massive job to help ensure that what we're building next, this new world that's being realized, actually works for human flourishing.
I was inspired to write this book because I wanted to think of ways that my kids could respond to the world that I brought them into. And also, I think it's really important that we don't stereotype, or, we tend to stereotype various generations. And we've seen so much of that with the millennials versus the boomers. And, I'm also Gen X, and like, I've been like, okay, where did we go? Right? We don't have an identity.
Most important, sorry, but just saying though, I think we're very important generation. We're the bridge. We're the ones shining the light for this next era. Massively important role to play. And I don't think we're in a world where we think, oh, the young ones know. Like, what do they know? They're children. They need guidance. Just because they may have some facility with the digital tools doesn't mean they understand what it means to be human in this new era.
What's really also important is for older generations to really understand that norms might change. So what we've gotten used to, right? So, I think for a while, there was a fair amount of canceling, for example, of people who made mistakes in the past. And then you pull up some digital record that never dies. And then you think, okay, well, that's the end of your, popularity or whatever, or legitimacy. And I think because everyone is now subject to that, I do hope that the way we understand mistakes going forward will change. People talk about the right to be forgotten. I actually think of it more as a right to be forgiven for being human. I mean, analog or digital, we make mistakes. And I think we need to be more forgiving as societies on casting judgment on people's mistakes when they come up for important roles, or when they, make some sort of statement that gains popularity. It's important to not tear people down because of what they've done in the past, because we've all done something, that's regrettable in the past.
That's a whole other book. That's a whole other study. That's online culture. How should we behave? What's acceptable? What's not? What should we be doing? I remember talking to somebody in a course I was running, and they were like, well, we should just say whatever we think online. Isn't that we're supposed to just clap back and say whatever you think? And I said very clearly, in fact, quite the opposite. If you're not going to add something of value to the conversation, just shut up. This is a purely selfish position, because you're going to be perceived by what you do online. You're going to be judged and evaluated, and you're gonna lose jobs or get jobs or whatever, or people are going to want to be friends with you or not friends with you or partner with you based on your online conduct. And now that they can just run an AI and know every single detail of your online life ever, what you say online needs to be absolutely precisely thought out before you do it. Do not clap back. Do not react. Be thoughtful and human, and maybe compassionate, maybe show some true decency. But yet the culture is clap back, be nasty, be mean, because that's going to get attention. If you say something mean or nasty or triggering or provocative, the algorithm will boost that. So that's what people are trained to do by the algorithms. Right. And so as a human being, if you're smart, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going online. I'm going to spend I spend most of my day online, pretty much what people do. I need to be super, 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 super careful what I say. I need to bring my best self to the online. That's how I see it. Yet the culture is to do the opposite. And so that's a whole other conversation. Let's talk about the book. Let's dive in. This is so important. This work is massively crucial. In your book, and I'm going to start at the very beginning. In your book, you use the term data as a plural. Data are everywhere. And data, of course, is the plural of the word datum. But we generally use the word data as a singular. So just to clarify for the audience, because I'm going to read some things where you talk about data are, explain your choice.
Yeah, I think so. In social sciences, and now I think in the popular media, we often use data is, because it's like family. It's like a plural but singular noun. But I wanted to point out, one, that's actually, people working in sciences, for example, you often use the plural, because it's true. You're talking about multiple. And so, for me, it's not just one data point of, what's being collected. We're having data collected about us all the time. So it's always plural. I also think it's important, to think about data as collective in nature. It's not just us as individuals experiencing data collection. That is true, but that the implications for that are always collective. Data don't really matter when it's just your data, quote unquote, your data. What matters is that the data about you are compared to other people like you. And so that's really, why I think of data as collective and individual, why I like using the plural, not the singular. And also it sort of ties back to the title of the book, We the Data. I mean, we are part of a collective. And this is an enterprise. The data collection enterprise is one we're in together.
There's a story you tell in the book about the Ring doorbell.
Yeah, sure. So I like talking about Ring doorbell and other video doorbells. Right? Because it's, a lot of people know what Ring is. It's a very popular set of devices, and it's been around for a while. It has a famous pitchman, Shaquille O'Neal, basketball legend, LA Laker, of course, but also that we kind of know about. People enjoy putting them on their houses and on their properties because it brings a level of convenience and I think security to situations that people often feel, if they feel like they need more security around their homes and their properties. So in and of itself, it seems harmless. In fact, it's kind of like, kind of device that you would add on and gives you some added convenience. I know during COVID, especially, like, sales went up of these items because people didn't want to talk to each other face to face. And so it's sort of like a way to make sure you're getting your packages or whatever. And sort of having that interaction without having to talk to one another directly, or face to face rather. But because they're so ubiquitous, because they're around a lot of homes. I mean, so in the book, I talk about how data are sticky. And one of the ways they're sticky is because they're mundane. They're everyday. And so the Ring is an everyday device, in that it's not surprising when people get a video doorbell. But it also lines people's houses. It's usually depending on where you live, but a lot of times Ring doorbells are going to be in residential streets and residential neighborhoods, not public spaces. We're kind of used to this idea of closed caption and TV surveillance in public spaces where potentially something problematic could happen. But on side streets, on people's houses, that's less expected. And so you're probably just going to be doing your own thing, like walking and talking and whatnot. And that's all being captured on Ring doorbells, right?
So, okay, so we're
Yeah.
walking, there's a residential street, let's say there's a block, maybe there are 5 homes on this block,
Yeah.
and everyone has a Ring doorbell. You walk past these houses because you walk to the park where you do a workout.
Or go to
every
school.
day. Or go to
you're
school.
walking the dog. Yeah.
Or you're walking the dog. And you're going for a run on the street. Your normal everyday behavior, you don't have a Ring doorbell because you don't think you need one. But every time you pass these houses, what happens?
So audio and video data are being captured because these devices capture a snippet of that. And if you happen to walk up to your friend's house and you're not aware, like some of these systems can also use facial recognition technology to identify who you are, right? Because it's good to know who's at the door. I mean, and so you think about it from the perspective of the person or the people walking by, you're unaware. And if you are aware, you can't really change. By the time you notice, you can't really change what you were doing. I mean, that's usually my realization when I walk by these devices. But if you're driving too, I mean, they capture movement, right, within a sort of defined space. And so really what's happening is that our everyday activities are being monitored, not by the state per se, but by, people who are intending to capture other types of security concerns on their properties. So it's a real tension, right?
Yeah. Let's say in apartment buildings or office buildings, or I think if office buildings, we tend to think there are going to be cameras for security purposes, maybe more. We're like, oh, I'm in a public space. It's different sort of rules in your behavior, how you're going to treat the environment, how you're going to treat yourself. You walk into a public building, you're like, oh, I'm in a public building. This is public. Everyone can see me. Maybe they're recording me. But let's say people live in an apartment building. Mm-hmm. And the Ring doorbells on all the various doors you pass on your way to your unit. This is happening, right?
This is happening.
Isn't this? So to get to your home, you must pass through these cameras that are tracking your behavior, that are capturing your behavior, and then goes into some pool somewhere where it's all processed and...
Well, and Ring I want to say Ring in particular, right, has agreements with law enforcement agencies. So, there's discretion for Ring company to, share data on the back end with data, law enforcement rather. So there's that. But, okay, so let's say that
law enforcement that's another conversation, and we can get into that. But it's not just law enforcement. It's data that then can be attached to an individual that then can be sold or accessed by other actors, other people, other geopolitical entities. I mean, all kinds of things. There's no limit.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happens with data, right?
Well, so at the moment, and this is why, I don't use the phrase your data or my data, because actually the data generated by your Ring device and your video doorbell doesn't belong to the owner. And I think that's something that people need to wrap their heads around as well, is that we're creating data and we might think we have claims over these data, but actually data are linked in all sorts of different data sets, as you just pointed out. So data are bought and sold, and that's what makes them really useful for us as societies to understand what's going on. But there is a sense of we don't have a lot of control over the data once they're created.
In the book, you say, and I'm going to actually read the quote, data-intensive technologies such as AI and their makers are not neutral, and they are not for good. Although these technologies are made by people, they are not necessarily made for all the people or even many people in terms of thinking about potential harms alongside the benefits of advancements. Awarenesses of the changes to our humanity that datafication brings will not be fully realized until it is clear to all of us what is happening. Awareness of what data do will not come about automatically. Okay, so I want you to explain, because you use this term datafication, And that's a thing that's happening. So explain datafication for like an 8th grader.
I think the best way to think about datafication is all the stuff that you do in interaction with digital devices becomes data. And so it's sort of a way to think about how human life has become datafied. It has become data, so to speak. So you live your life in an analog way, but a lot of your activities and even your thoughts, if you're using search engines, for example, are being recorded as data. They're effectively forever.
And so the thing is, and in the last line you say, but we are not, the thing is, data is invisible. Awareness of the changes to our humanity, right? Awareness of what data will do. It doesn't come about automatically because data is invisible. We can't sense data. We can't see data. We don't know what is happening, but it's happening. And an invisible layer of datafication is happening all the time.
And it's happening because of choices made by data collectors, which are mostly companies, right? At this stage. Those are the ones that I'm most concerned with in the book. And so they're not being overseen by citizenry, for example, right? And this is what I mean by it's not, these products are made for the many, they're made for markets, right? And this kind of goes back to your point about engagement as a norm of behavior. People do things to get clicks, to get higher up in the algorithmic ranking. That is a form of socialization that's happening because companies have made choices about how to collect data and how to rank different types of activities as important or not.
You talk about that in the book when you talk about big tech and big tech as global governors and who's actually running the world, really. I mean, so datafication is happening, but we're not aware of it. We're not conscious of it. It's happening everywhere all the time. And you say that datafication is a human rights issue. What do you mean by this?
So when we talk about human rights, we're talking about protecting human potential. And so if things that are happening in the world on a daily basis to individuals and individual choices are becoming data, it affects the way that we can live our human lives to our potential. It affects our human experience. And as such, it is a human rights issue because human rights are about thinking about what's in common with all of our human experiences. What things do we need to protect so people can live to their potential? What things do we need to prevent so they can live to their potential?
But technology and what is created is not necessarily designed or thought out in or for the interests of human beings and human flourishing. Founders start out being really great people. They want to create something that people want to use, and it's really cool and it's fun and it's like it adds value to the human being. But it later on in the boardroom, economic decisions are made. Like, no, you have to make money from this. So how are you going to make money from this? Usually that's how it started. The internet started. People are like, oh, let's create something really cool. Oh, no, let's make money from this. Let's get a lot of people to use the product because it's cool. It's a network. More people are better. Oh, how do we make money from this? How do we market to these people? How do we monetize this? How do we monetize every aspect of what this is? The human interests are not factored in the start of these tech products. They may be built initially innocently enough, but there's a business operation behind it. And business means profits for shareholders, for investors, and that's how that works. And so the interests of the individual, the so-called user, terrible word, the rights of the humans who utilize this product are not factored in to the design of the product fundamentally, which is why we end up with this whole question where you have to write a book, the data, human rights in the digital age. And where people say, if it's free, then you're the product. That's the whole thing. So if it's free, then whoa, watch out, because somewhere they're making money and then you're the product. And you go in depth in this book on why we need to understand this, because our human rights are on the line. On page 22, you say, we used to live in a mostly analog world and we could turn our computers off. Digital data came from what we fed machines when they were on. Now, few of our key digital technologies are meant to be turned off, and data are ubiquitous. We don't stop generating data through our devices whether we are sleeping or awake, whether we know it or not. Every minute of every day, we generate data about ourselves and others, what we're doing, what we're thinking or not, where we are, how much we're sleeping, who we like, what we buy, and whom we communicate with.
I think so. When data were not so common, and when data about people were not so common, I think people used to think we need more data, especially, if you think about fields like computer science or data science, they need as much data as possible, okay, to make their sort of products successful and to understand what they're doing and to fix any bugs. The problem is when you look at data about people. I think this is where the human rights come in, because I'm not concerned about astronomical data or data about tigers or something like that.
We like that.
We like that. We like more data,
yeah.
Right? About
more
that.
data.
But when it comes to humans, I think we crossed the line somewhere in, the 2000s, 2010s. I don't know when big data really became a thing, because I like to remind people that data don't exist in nature, that someone has to make those data, right? So in the past, we would just take our time reading a news article and it wouldn't be data. Now, websites track how quickly we can read through a news story, right? And that becomes part of, their business model. And I think that is really important. Shoshana Zuboff really got us down this line of thinking about behavioral surplus and how that was monetized. And I think part of the problem is we're still thinking that data are valuable in this economic way, but data about people, it, should be thought of as not just economically beneficial and as you pointed out, monetization, using data, but people are not just financial beings. We're also social beings. We're political beings. We're cultural beings. And so if we don't think about the implications of creating data about human beings in this holistic way, that's when you get this distorted situation we have now. And this is why someone like me needs to say, hey, if you're collecting data about people, we should be thinking about human rights, because people are not just economic vehicles, where we have dignity, we have autonomy, right?
The way businesses are structured, it's like a drone. You say, okay, your target is to go and do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to do it one way or the other. But it's like a business. The business has a target. It's like maximize profits and do whatever you need to do to maximize profits. That's it. That's the end game. Just do it. We don't care what you have to do. Maximize profits. So they don't care about human rights unless somebody else factors in human rights, unless something else takes care of the human rights. The way our businesses are designed, it's just maximize profits. And unless and until we change that, and we change the consciousness of humanity, where people are like, no, a good business also takes care of humans. Businesses will always do that because they're competing. If they're like, I want to take care of people, but my competitor doesn't give a crap, so they're going to beat me out, and then the market's going to do this, and then my stock price is going to go down, and then I'll be over. And I'm the good guy, so I'm screwed for trying to be a good person, because the market is designed to maximize profits. And whoever does that best wins. Then somebody else needs to take care of human rights. So it's government or it's people themselves. We established that human rights, they're being compromised by datafication. Let's understand this nature of data, because I think the problem is, as participants in the process of creating this data, we're completely oblivious. We have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And we need to know. We need to wake up. You talk about the 4 reasons why data are sticky. And why does it matter that data are sticky? And what makes them sticky? Why do we need to understand that?
I think we need to understand that because as you pointed out earlier, most people think of we experience data collection as invisible. It just happens as we're going through our daily lives. So the Ring doorbell is a great example of that. It just happens, whether you like it or choose it or not. So I like talking about it like gum stuck on the bottom of your shoe. Like, everyone has that unfortunate experience. It's really easy to step on it and really hard to take off. The difference between sticky gum on your shoe and data, of course, is that we don't actually know when data are being made. And so it's actually pretty hard to get rid of data. Okay. Even with our, there's some policies out there, especially in the European Union, that are supposed to make it less sticky, but it's still a pretty sticky process, because data can be anonymized. Once they're anonymized, it's really difficult to remove them. But okay, they're sticky because they're about our mundane activities. So they're things we can't change. Think about, you can maybe change your morning routine and change the way you run. So if you use different fitness apps and stuff like that. but you can't really change the way you walk, like gait data. You can't, that's fairly common to be collected. Many people walk in a certain way we don't even know about our gaits, GAIT.
This is so uncomfortable for me. If you think you're being surveilled constantly and people are tracking the way you ambulate, and then now they can identify you based on gait.
Yeah, because people walk very differently, right? Some people walk
very uniquely.
Toes, some people bounce, some people are very stiff. So that's one way. I mean, another biometric way that we think about is facial recognition technology. So that's now become so common. But taking measurements of your face, the different types of measurements. Most people don't change their faces in their lifetime, certainly not significantly. Some people do, but that's another thing. It's mundane, right? You're kind of stuck with it. You're stuck with the way you walk, your face, your morning commute, most of us, same thing. Those are just examples. Data are also sticky because we talked about this linked together. So data are collected and they're shared across different systems. So you collect data for one purpose, it may be shared with another company or the government for another purpose. Data also are effectively forever once they're made, because it's really hard to verify deleted data. I think that's something that we probably often experience. Like, oh, I thought that post was gone. It reappeared, the zombie social media post, right? So deleting is hard. So I like to assume that once data are created about you, they're effectively forever, because you don't know if they're deleted or not. And the last thing that makes data sticky, and this is something that we talked about at the very beginning, is this idea of co-creation. Okay, so we talked about the collectiveness of data. So they're not just about you, they're about other people like you. But the other thing I think we really need to remember with data is that they don't exist in nature. So to make data, you need a collector, someone who wants to make data, and you need a source, which is all of us, generating all these activities and all these thoughts.
Okay, so there's the source, which is whatever they're tracking, right? Whatever beings they're tracking, whatever behavior.
Yeah, we're the sources, like we the people.
We're the source, and then there's a collector.
So somebody has to have an interest in making the data about your activities. And so we as data sources, we're doing stuff, we're living our lives, and companies largely these days are coming in and collecting tons of data about us, right? Your iPhone or your smartphone is a real tracking device in terms of what websites you visit, where you are, various environmental factors that contribute to the working of that device. That stuff's being collected as we live our lives. And so we are sources of those data, but there are collectors that actually go to the effort of taking ambient information, I guess, and making those into data points that are then stored in a database. So data are co-created in this sort of relationship where, and I think this is why it's so hard to say this is my data or this is your data, because it's data about you, data about me, but we're not actually making the data. We're only like half of that equation, right? The data collector is making the data.
Exactly. We're going to get into who owns the data. In the book, you write about 23andMe. In October of last year, there was a massive breach of 23andMe. They exposed more than 7 million the data of 7 million people, the names, addresses, genetic data, and that was then sold online. Let's talk about DNA data.
Yeah.
Like genetic data.
DNA data is I think, the best example of thinking about collective data. So, a lot of times you talk about your steps or your face. So it's kind of, okay, how is that collective? Because DNA data is your DNA. Like every person has DNA and has data, corresponding data about those DNA. But when you look at someone's DNA, you're actually looking at information, not just about that person, but about everyone they're related to, right? So a breach of 23andMe's customer database doesn't just reveal information about those customers who swabbed their cheeks. It's everyone related to them. And so it is collective. It is a collective source of data. It tells a story about many, many, many people. And so if the breach was actually of, X number of customers, but it was actually had implications for many, many more times that people. And so I think it's a good example because, it could be used for good. For example, they caught the Golden State Killer that way through DNA data. But this is not most of the time we're not Golden State Killers. We're just regular people. And so the information is really being stored in this way that has real potential for harm going forward or for people to take advantage of that data. It's just sitting there in terms of when we think about DNA data.
You say in the book that data are only valuable when they're pooled. The consumer data market is worth 400 billion per year as a whole, but individually, like, our data is worth very little. Yet, collecting someone's data is still theft. Emerging technologies researcher Jathan Sadowski writes, many common practices of data collection should actually be treated as a form of theft that I call data appropriation. Appropriation is a nice way of saying stealing.
So I think what I'd like to point out there is that the data are if we think about data only as economic, then I think there are ways that we've developed in society to sort of distribute the rights, right? If you think about land, for example, I think the problem with thinking about things purely in an economic sense is that it erases the humanity from those data. And I think this is why it's appropriation, in the sense that you assign this minuscule value to every individual's data. But then in the aggregate, it's worth so much. And it's worth so much because you've learned so much about their social and political and cultural behaviors, and you can resort people and nudge them towards different types of activities that you're seeking for them to do. And so you're really taking much more value than you are giving back potentially in these sort of economic models. And I think that's the part that feels appropriative, right? Is that you're definitely, as an individual data source, not getting the kind of value that you're actually providing in the aggregate to these data collectors.
So we need some frameworks in place to deal with humanity's data as a whole. First of all, we need to think about it correctly. Our legal thinking, our political thinking has evolved over centuries. And in the Western world, a lot of it's come out of British common law. And we have years of thinking about this, writing about it. We have an understanding of this. And many of these laws even go back to 10 commandments. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not do this, and some basic sort of rights and wrongs. But when it comes to data, which is this powerful, powerful force that's being utilized, we have no framework for even thinking about it. And you're begging us to think about it as a human rights issue. But it's the political rights, they're human rights, they're business rights, there are all kinds of rights that are not delineated at all. There's nothing, no signposts, no guideposts, no framework, no maps, nothing. Just this amorphous space that predators are siphoning off billions and billions of dollars and exposing us as humans to. It's outrageous. I mean, it's like a mass global disaster that's happening, and we're just like sitting there helpless, and our leaders are impotent, lacking any understanding of what the heck's going on. And look, a tech company should not be allowed to do whatever it wants with our data. We're in the dark ages.
So I think part of the problem is we're still not, the policymakers are not thinking about AI systems. Everyone's in a rush to regulate artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence, AI systems need three things, right? They need compute, so computing resources. They need algorithms. Okay, so we're regulating algorithms a lot. But they need data. They don't work without data, right? And right now they work pretty well, and they seem to approximate people because we have so much data about human beings, period. And I think that for a long time, this idea of having more data was seen as a good thing. And now I think, what I'm trying to say is maybe too much data about individual human beings is not a good thing. It might be good for some sort of overall idea of seeking efficiency or something, but it's not good for individual living human beings. That's really what human rights are about. It's not good for our autonomy. We don't have, our choices are increasingly limited in the sense that we don't see everything that we might otherwise because of algorithmic filtering. We know that these different all these data being collected about people are being leveraged against marginalized populations. Like, there's no mistake why facial recognition was, has been used against, marginalized peoples, right? Whether it's racial or socioeconomic. So we know that all these human rights factors, and I think one of the things we really need to come to terms with is that not all data are good for society. And in fact, there's this idea of data minimization.
So one of the exciting things about AI is we can use it to speed up research and transform healthcare and science, and there are lots of positives. I think that's a good use of AI, and we want data for that. So in fact, having good genetic data that's available to researchers might be a really positive use of data. High quality, great data for scientists and researchers and people who are trying to solve human problems is a great thing.
But the trouble is once data are created, they're effectively forever. They're sticky. So you can't, once they're out there, we don't right now have very good ways to protect unauthorized access to data. We hear about breaches of data all the time, right? So companies are having real trouble. And these are, companies that have a real interest in maintaining the security of their systems. And, like credit agencies, right? They're being breached. So what I take from that though is data, the existence of data leads to it is automatically vulnerable to malicious actors. It just is. We need to think about it in terms of human rights. So it's not just data are an unqualified good. So you're totally right. I mean, there are definitely situations where collecting data has more social benefit or more potential social good than social harm. And we can accept the risks of what happens if the data fall into wrong hands. But I do think that one thing that does not exist right now in the big tech world is explaining why they need X, Y, and Z data. Why do they need all the data that they collect? In fact, lots of people write about the fact that the data being collected are often egregious. We don't actually need all these data. They collect it because they can.
Yeah.
And so that follows a data maximalization framework. And I think we should follow a data minimalization framework. So one thing policymakers could do is actually make corporations explain, why do you need to collect these data? Have you considered the human rights implications of these data? Not just privacy. Privacy is about keeping people out once something exists. And I'm saying, why don't we think about the implications for autonomy and dignity before the data are created? So we don't have to make these privacy protections. And I think that's part of it, right? And also the other part of, just to answer your question from a while ago, what else can we make companies do? I mean, right now, human rights frameworks are about holding states responsible for protecting human rights. So when we say human rights, it's about making your government protect rights or prevent rights from being breached. But we know more and more that actually big tech companies are doing some of these breaches, and some of them are actively trying to protect human rights on their platforms. So rather than making it all about state responsibility, we should be thinking about not just the human rights implications of big tech and their creations, but their responsibilities. Like what do companies owe all of us as their potential consumers? Like, we're going to use your stuff. You're going to generate profits from our use of your stuff, but you owe us something, right? You can't create products that are harmful to our human rights.
The big tech companies make a lot of money from our data. So they're like, let's collect as much data as possible from our users because we're going to take it and we're going to make money from it one way or the other. And you're saying we should take a data minimalization approach, which would mean let me collect only the minimum amount of data I need to allow persons to use this product effectively. But why on earth would they do that if they can make more money doing the other approach?
Well, they're not going to do it themselves. No. And this is where government
and I think we've seen it long enough now to know that our governments are not capable. They're not smarter than the technologists. They can ask the technologists to do X, Y, and Z, but they can't really enforce it because who's going to enforce it?
You're not the only person who said that to me. And I think anytime people want to talk about regulating big tech, you get this sort of pushback, like who's going to do it? Because governments have proven themselves inept.
Incapable, inept. Yeah.
But okay, so first of all, as I said at the beginning, what kind of political scientist am I? I'm not someone who only thinks about governments in terms of how of entities that govern society, right? So corporations are part of this calculus. Governance is about creating order. It's about creating rules. And if we think about the way we live our lives, platforms are creating way more rules directly on us, like how we talk online, how we use our devices, right? So So first of all, we need to think about governing as beyond just what governments do. But even so, you want to ask who can regulate big tech. I think governments can do better than what they've done, because governments have been around for a long time, at least in the sort of developed world that we're talking about here. So they can punish wrongdoing after it's happened. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the policy making has, so like punishing wrongdoers, right? Or preventing things from being used after they're created. So like regulating the use of certain types of AI technologies like facial recognition. They can also create incentives, right? But that's something that hasn't been talked about too much. So I was using the example of EVs. EVs are something that governments have incentivized, and automakers have created lots of EVs, right?
It's true.
And so one thing they could do is use economic incentives to see if big tech corporations, if AI companies will actually respond to more socially beneficial incentives. And the other thing that I think that could be put in place is, governments can also step in and say, well, there's certain types of data collection that we are prohibiting or severely regulating. So you want to collect certain types of data, you're going to have to explain. You have to explain to us as governments, but also to the public. Why do you need facial data? For what purposes? And to allow people to actually evaluate why the data collection is happening, instead of just letting it happen and then saying, oh no, you guys need to do better after the fact.
Now we have the AI layer, compute,
And
algorithms, and data. And in fact, without the compute, the GPUs, the NVIDIA GPUs, to be precise,
yes, that's right.
and the big data collected by the internet, there is no AI. AI has been around for 80 years at least, and no progress was made at all until we had GPUs, which came out of the video game industry, 1, and 2, the internet, which created big data. Now we have this AI layer, AI ecosystem that sprung up post ChatGPT, and they're going gangbusters. Billions of dollars of venture capital are being deployed to these AI startups that now want more and more data, and they're going to do anything to get it. They're not going to say, oh, we should now pull back on the collection of data. Now there's billion-dollar incentives to collect more data, access more data, and big tech. Let's be clear, AI is just big tech on steroids. What's the incentive to not aggressively now increase and expand surveillance and collection and creation of data? The AI needs it. If these models, large language models, don't have a constant feed of human data, they actually start to degrade, and the functionality drops up almost severely. So they need this constant flow of human data. So what's the incentive?
Yes, you're asking the right question. They have no incentive right now in a frictionless environment. But the point of all the other entities that are in our society, so it's not just governments, but it's civil society, right? It's other corporations that may have an interest that is not AI based, okay? Like we have an incentive, and the people, the people, in democracies, we have a choice, and we have the ability to create friction for any entity that has become overly powerful. That's what we're talking about here, right? Is that they've become overly powerful. And so it's not incumbent on the overly powerful to police themselves. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think there are other actors, other entities that do have an interest in thinking about this. So I think you're asking a really good question. But the other thing I think that is really important, the way you thought about this, is that AI is a data problem. It is a data governance issue. So AI by itself, and this, we talk about AI like it's one thing. AI is many things, okay? Every AI system out there right now that is dominating the market and dominating the conversation it's very data intensive. And you're absolutely right about thinking about, okay, well, LLMs no longer sound like human beings when they use synthetic data. Let me just point out, I have to point this out. You're absolutely right, because why does ChatGPT sound like a person? Because it's based on data from millions and millions and millions of people. So of course it's going to sound like people. And why does the model degrade when it loses human data from humans? Because it no longer has that connection to human beings. And so what I want us to remember, this is also why this is a human rights book. Don't forget that AI comes from people. The algorithms are coming from people. The computing capacity is coming from people. And for me, the data are all about people. We are underlying these systems. And I think we need to remember that. Don't stand there and be, to be in awe of the magic of the AI. It's not magic. It's not magic. So it's human. And so I think that we really need to emphasize that point, Misha. And I'm so glad you actually put it together for me like that so I could do it that way.
I love it. You talk about data literacy. And I think this is a conversation about data literacy. I'm trying to become more literate, understand what this is. I want our audience to understand what this is. But tell us, what is data literacy and why is it important in this world and moving forward? And then I want us to talk quickly about some of the solutions at a global level and then at an individual level.
So data literacy is about data competence. So think about literacy we have in terms of linguistic literacy. You can read and you can write, and therefore you can reason through words and through language. That is what literacy, as we think about through language, is about. So we also think about numeric literacy. You can do math, and you can think about how math applies to your store transactions, for example. So having data literacy means being competent in data. It means understanding that data are created, that you have a role in, when it comes to human data, you have a part in that creation of the data and to recognize that. And it is also to recognize the limits of data and what you can't do everything with data. I think there's a tendency to think, well, we'll just, because of AI systems, we'll just let AI do some tasks that you really don't need an AI to do. And so what I think data literacy is a set of concepts for individuals to have, you and I, but also for communities to have. This is what literacy only means something in the collective, right? Because if you're personally literate and nobody else is, really can't talk to anybody else, can't be competent. So that's what I mean. And I think that's part of the solution. It's not the whole solution. We've talked about all the other solutions that I didn't get a chance to develop in the book but I think they're important. And I think data literacy is really important as a right, because if you just think of data literacy as it's nice to be data literate, that's not going to get us anywhere. I think everyone should have an entitlement to that kind of conceptual framework. And just the last thing I'll say is data literacy is not data scientists. We don't have to be data experts. That's what a data scientist is. We need to be data competent. So literacy is a much lower bar in terms of understanding, and it's also the most basic that'll help us, even if we can't write the algorithms to mine the data, we can certainly understand why it's important to do that or to not do that.
Yeah. What's one thing that listeners can do in response to all of this? They've heard this. How can we help them to be better prepared? We're moving down this sort of path of more data, more technology, exponential change. What can listeners do? Just simple things that they can do. Of course, I think get the book, like start to learn about these things. And I'll put the links in the description so they can follow you and get the book and learn more. But what else? What else would you suggest?
I get asked this question a lot, and I think, so one thing that people really need to do, and I know, words really matter, I think. And it's really important to start thinking about yourself not as a data subject, which makes you subjected to the practices of data collectors, but to think of yourself actually as an important part of the equation, as stakeholders. We have a role as stakeholders in data because you're the data source, and without you, there's no data, right?
Right.
So I think it's really important to think about ourselves as critical actors in this data process. We have not been asked for our opinions or to be part of the process today, but we should be. And I think that's a real change in thinking that people, I'd love people to take on.
And what would people... No, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, but the other thing I really would like us to do as especially in the developed world, is to think about the role of libraries, the public library, as a really important institution that we should be investing appropriate resources into in terms of making us data literate. And so I talk about this a lot because I really think that it's important to think about libraries in the process of data literacy. They are critical actors in helping people learn to read and write in terms of literacy. And and so they do that job. They have reach into different communities and they help people for free, that, they're accessible. But the thing that makes them unique to be data literacy stewards is that libraries are your original data collectors and sorters. They collect resources, they put them into categories so that we go into the library and we can find things and we can learn things. And so librarians are data, they're not data collectors, but they're data guides. They've always helped us understand the holdings that they have and the world we live in because they have so much information. They have so much data. And so that, I think that's a really important social actor that's not necessarily talked about in the tech space, is local libraries and in their work in helping us get data literate.
Should we be like unionizing, gathering together as sources of data and saying, no, we have rights, you can't do that?
I have a very measured response to that, which is I think it's a good idea. But a lot of the models out there for these, what are called data intermediaries, right, are usually about financial exchange. Let's get together and sell the data we have together to get a better price. And I discourage that kind of thinking. So if it is about data unionization, if it is about creating a common identity around certain types of data, that is getting us closer to the full idea of humanity, which is we're not just financial actors, right? We're social beings, we're cultural beings and political beings. And so data unions, if they work like a labor union, would be much more appropriate in a human rights context than something like a data trust, which is a financial model.
I love it. I think we're running out of time. Anything else you think we should talk about before I let you go? Like, what's next for you?
I'm working on a whole bunch of things. So I'm working with a computer science colleague, Parang Irani, on thinking about AI literacy issues and data safety issues. So we've got an interdisciplinary research group starting there. I'm also really interested in thinking about these questions around big tech and these technology companies' effects on society and how we think about the regulation. And so I've just started the work on what I hope will be my next book project in terms of considering big tech as economic actors. And a lot of people like to call them monopolies, right? But I actually think they're far more than just monopolies. They're all the way that they produce, what they're producing is actually so infused in our lives that we really need to think about what it means and what they're doing. And I think that will help us think about other regulatory tools besides what we talked about today.
So maybe they're like geopolitical actors.
I'm not going to say too much, but I do want to address the fact that they are changing the way we interact socially. They're changing the means that we interact politically, and they really change how people, individuals, expect certain things to work and how other things don't work because of how platforms really shape our behavior on the individual and group levels.
Beautiful. So the book is We the Data, Human Rights in the Digital Age. I will put the link in the description below, as well as Wendy's social links, so they can follow you, Wendy. And do you have a newsletter or anything like that they can keep up?
I don't right now. Right now, I'm just trying my best to update.
You're writing
to write more things. So
yeah, Wendy, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. It's such an important topic. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for this conversation.
Make sure to listen, follow, and subscribe for new episodes wherever you get your podcasts and on our YouTube channel.